Thanks everybody. I'm glad to see so much interest in this project. It's been a useful exercise. I think most of you all probably know me, but for those that may not, I'm Eric Cockley. I'm the director of the city's Planning and Community Development Department. So just to tell you kind of a little bit about how we got here before I hand it over to Brian to go through the slides and the study itself. As some of you may know, we're in the middle of a rewrite of our comp plan, which is our community vision and is used for future land use decisions. And so as part of that, we've had a lot of discussions with the different folks on our advisory committee and partner agencies about kind of the juncture that our community's at in terms of growth and investment and where do we go from here. And so we kept coming back from various sides of the issue to the need for a housing study. That's not the only reason. That's kind of the key thing that got us going. We also, I think, are all aware of some of our affordable housing challenges in town, and trying to identify what gaps we have that are not keeping our market and supply from keeping up with demand, if that's the case, and why, and what do we need to fix to make those things happen as we hope to continue to see the community thrive. And that's what we wanted to achieve with the study, to get that information about demand, about differing our units, sensitive, density, and why are things that we need to have happening not happening, and what do we need to do to fix that. With that, I'll introduce Brian. So Brian Points began at Points Consulting in 2019 and has over 15 years of experience working for a series of management consulting firms. His quantitative skills include feasibility studies, revenue, cost forecasting, real estate pro formas, opportunity zone technical assistance, economic fiscal impact analysis, industry, market studies, econometrics, and target industry analysis. He's completed over 100 plus projects across 30 plus states and specializes in housing related studies, conducting 18 real estate feasibility studies and market studies over just the past 2 years. Points Consulting was selected by a housing study committee formed by representatives from both the city and the county staff, as well as a couple other interested citizens. And thanks again to both the city commission and the fiscal court for seeing the value of this exercise and choosing to both partner to fund the study so that we could have it for use in future decision making. And since the study committee selected them, we've been working since about the beginning of 2023 to get where we are now. Before I hand it over, my card is over here and some half sheets with QR codes that will take you directly to the link to everything you're going to see tonight. So if you leave here and want to go through the slide deck again, look through the information, if that generates any questions, feel free to grab one of those and take it with you, or my card, and you can call me. I'll send you a link, and we can do it that way. So I think Brian's going to go through the slides, share the information, and then we're hoping to open it up after that to kind of questions, and we can have a discussion and go from there.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
There you go. And thanks to City of Frankfort and Franklin County for making us your partner in this process. As Eric mentioned, we do a lot of these types of studies, and our hope is that when we do these types of studies, it really becomes part of the thinking and the planning for that community. If you don't plan for what you're going to do with your land use and your housing, things are going to happen to you, and they may not necessarily be what your community wants. So what we've been asked to do is to look at the statistics in terms of the economy, the population, the housing, all that stuff, to communicate with community members, which we did through a survey that had over 1,000 responses, and to have in-depth one-on-one interviews with also additional partners and organizations that have a particularly high stake in that matter. So it's always important to me when I do these studies that we don't give favor or bias to any particular group. City of Frankfort, like any place in the United States, has differing views on what the best version of the future is, and we tried to listen to all of those folks. So our job is to provide that data, and we've also put together some recommendations. These are just recommendations, so don't look at this and go to your next city council meeting and say, when are we doing this? Or you better not do that, because they need to discuss that, right? This goes to Eric and his team, to the planning commission, to make the decisions about what actually becomes policy. So with that said, I'll get started and also let you know that I've been asked by Eric to just do kind of a 20-minute run through of what's I think 170-page slide deck. So you have two options at that point. It's either speak a million miles a minute or focus on the highlights, and we're going to go with the latter in this case. But that said, there is a lot more information, and if you have a question, we probably do have some information on it, so I'm happy to answer that during the Q&A. So in terms of our project background, here's a bit about our team, and I'm indebted to my whole team, particularly Maria and Pedro in this case. Some of you all have met Pedro when he came out here to join me on a couple of occasions previously. Eric's already covered the rest of what we do, so I don't need to linger on this. And here's some of the studies so you know where else we've worked and some of the characteristics of those places. We've also worked in Frankfurt on several occasions in the past. So in terms of executive summary, what's the big picture story here in this community? Well, I'd say one of the most important things is that housing affordability is always a very relative concept relative to what you think affordable is. So in the national scheme of things, Frankfurt is still a very affordable place, and the metrics that I'll show will bear that out. That doesn't mean it's affordable compared to past expectations, right? Because you have seen huge increases in cost. But that's a market reality, and it does result in certain things. It's just kind of an economic truism that when demand exceeds supply, what happens? I'll tell you, price goes up. So you can expect that to continue to happen in the future. At the same time, you've also had this 12% decrease in the occupational tax over the past 2 fiscal years. All right, so that's created some challenges in terms of funding. And it's also, I think, changing the conversation about land use a little bit, because you have to kind of, for the city to function, for the county to function, to be able to put in the roads and the sewers and all that kind of stuff, the money's got to come from somewhere. Really, a lot of these commercial industrial type of projects are a better way to generate things like occupational tax than is residential. So you can't just build houses, because then you're not going to produce the money that you need. Historically, I think there's no secret that the area has been known as a government town. So that it's amazing actually how 20% of the jobs by our count are in what you'd call public administration. But that is starting to change. Really exceptional growth in the private sector in terms of on all fronts, employment, earnings, and establishments over the past few years. Also, importantly, you are flanked on the east and the west by 2 of the top 5 fastest growing counties in the state of Kentucky. So that is going to seep in. It is seeping in. And if you want it to, it will continue to seep in. And that's really going to accelerate over the next few years, according to our analysis. So again, these affordability levels, it's going to continue to drive in migration. It's going to continue to drive the opportunity for investment in short-term rentals. We'll talk more about that later. I feel like there are some aspects of the housing market that are pretty underserved, particularly what you have here in Frankfurt right now is a lot of economy or budget level multifamily or apartment complexes, but you don't have a lot of condos. You don't have a lot of higher amenity apartment complexes. You don't have a lot of middle density. You have single family and you've got economy multifamily. That's kind of the pattern, right? So what we would like to see, and I think you can do some things in terms of your processes and your zoning code, is to open up that whole middle space in between. One of the analogies I often like to use is imagine you were at a track meet and the only 2 events are the 100-meter dash and the 1600 meter. That's basically housing in the United States. There's one thing or there's other, and there's very little in the middle. And that's really, we have designed that according to the policies that we've implemented in the United States over the past 100 years. So it's time to start rethinking those things. There is some resistance, I'd say, to changing that high concentration of single family development. But I will tell you that what we often see is that when people see projects that are done well, which are often done initially through a planned unit development process or something like that, the familiarity with it grows very quickly. Last point I want to make on this front is that you also have some parcels with, I'd say, really high in your potential to do something strategic to start to turn the market expectations. So parcels B and C, what previously was called the Paddocks project down by the freeway behind the Kroger, the Home Street corridor, all these places, they're already kind of in transition and in conversation. If you can do some of these kind of mixed use patterns to allow for the use of some residential and some commercial, these are going to be huge for your future and for changing what the private sector may see as what Frankfort is. So this is the other thing I think a lot of people maybe don't realize, is that the private sector and builder community follows kind of a herd mentality. And I can't really blame them for that. They want to do things that they're confident that they're going to make money at and that they're going to serve a market need, okay? So it's always hard to be the first person to do something. The first person to make this unique type of product that hasn't been seen in that area before. But once it happens, a lot of other people can follow along with that. All right, so our areas of analysis, largely we focused on City of Frankfort and Franklin County. In some cases, it's helpful to do kind of some benchmarking. So we used the bluegrass region according to the state's economic development regions. That was the best approximate region to use. And then obviously, oftentimes you want to compare to the state in the US. So next we're going to go into housing needs. Talk about this for maybe 10 minutes. So here's what we came up with in terms of the future possibilities in terms of demand. And with this, I have to say that this is a version of the future reality. It could be lower, it could be higher. A lot of that is kind of depends on how much of the status quo changes and how quickly. But this is our best approximation based on the trajectory of both supply and demand in the market and all that kind of stuff. So we forecast a demand for over 2,800 housing units over the next 18 years. That's mostly going to continue to be in that single family style. We didn't do this on purpose, but if you look at the numbers, the distribution of housing units in Franklin County right now is 65% single family. The forecast is 64% single family. So not actually pushing for a major reconversion of the style, but at the same time, single family can be smaller, it can be tighter, it can be attached instead of detached, right? So these density things also kind of overlay everything we're talking about in addition to the style of housing. And part of the reason for that, again, is that the affordability of housing and relative affordability of construction is you don't have the same kind of cost pressure pushing high density here. You don't have the same kind of land use policies that you do in a lot of Western states that kind of push a lot of development inward. So it's just not, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that you're going to, of these 2,800 units, that 2,100 are going to be apartments. It's just probably not going to happen. But at the same time, the housing mix will need to diversify to include more middle density, multifamily, and affordable housing. A lot of terms there to define. So I think that some of that future growth that you do see, it's a 50, I think it's 48%, if I remember right, of the housing units in the city are currently in the category of multifamily or apartments. So that's typically buildings that have 5 or more units in them. So I think that over time, you're going to see more of those units kind of move into the middle density pattern. So it's not so much that the single family is decreasing, it's the multifamily is decreasing and merging more into this middle density kind of style. So what does that mean in terms of historic production? Over the past 3 years, you've had about 100 permits per year. I say permits in this case because we can't actually track when the buildings get their certificate of occupancy. All we can do is track when they get the permit. But it's roughly equivalent to how many new housing units are built. Forecasted demand over the short term here is not that high. And part of that reason is the economy that we're in. It's not great. And the other part of it is the builders, a lot of them are preferring to build in other places right now. So, but the pressure is coming and it can shift very quickly. So towards the end of this period, 2028 to 2040, then we're looking at basically double the amount of demand than what you currently have. So basically short term, kind of flat. You get a few years down the road, boom, it goes way up. And here's how that's distributed. So this is just charting what was on the previous, or putting into a table what was on the previous chart. So growth in most of these things, the only one that's going down is manufactured home community units. Nothing against manufactured home units. In fact, it's a great strategy in a lot of places, but you actually do have a lot of what are properly actually titled mobile homes that are going to go away because they're not going to last. And they can be replaced with other stuff, which is good. With that, you've got your multifamily. Middle density, we provide more terminology here. Duplex, triplex, quadplex, townhome, cottage, ADUs, all of these types of things. Huge opportunity for growth in that sector. Last thing I want to point out here is that affordable subsidized housing, I have to spell all of that out because those terms like workforce housing, affordable, like, you know, what does all this stuff means? What we mean by this is literal subsidized housing. So whether it's Section 8, low-income housing tax credits, homeless shelter units, whatever the case, whatever it is, you need more of them, okay? And that can come either within this or within this. And we'll talk in a few minutes about what those could look like. All right, so where does this stuff come from? Just briefly on our population forecast. We did our own independent forecast, and we're actually really close to Kentucky State Data Center out of University of Louisville. So either we're doing good work or they're doing good work, or both. We oftentimes don't agree with the state forecast. In this case, we did. And then particularly, so you have people are either born in a place or they move to a place. That's usually how they get to where they're at. Not a lot of other options if you think about it. So mostly, for most places in the US right now, that's driven by in-migration. And again, we've talked about those patterns and what's been happening, which is not a huge influx in Franklin County, but the huge influx could be coming. Shelley and Scott County rank number 1 and number 3 in terms of percentage growth. So what I think will probably happen here, or what has happened, is that COVID kind of pushed people out of urban areas, given opportunity to kind of work from home or work a hybrid schedule. So you had a lot of people moving to places like Georgetown, right? We all know that story. I don't think that those people are going to pack up and move 5 years down the road. But what could happen is that more people continue pouring into those places. And then the people who have lived there for 10, 20 years are like, too urban, I'm out of here. And they end up moving to a place like Frankfort. That's usually what you see. Or you have people who just skip over Shelbyville entirely and move to Frankfort from, Louisville. That's usually what we're seeing at the national level. And I think you're a few years out from that happening, but it's very possible. The state doesn't provide a forecast at the city level, so we applied that and we came up with this number for a 6.8% growth in population over that period of time. All right, affordability metrics. Very important stuff here. This is just a definitional slide because there's so many terms when it comes to housing, so I'll break this down real quick. Everything in affordability terms is broken down by area median income. So if you're 50%, let's say that the household income in Franklin County is about $60,000, which it is. If you're at 50% of AMI, then you're at about $30,000. Okay, so when you see 50% of AMI, like that's basically what it means. And then housing and urban development at the federal level defines for us what's kind of a safe territory, what should people be paying for housing. And if you get above 30%, the term they use for that is cost burdened. If you get above 50%, you are what they call severely cost burdened. So those are kind of those yellow flags and red flags that we want to look out for when thinking about affordability of rents for people. And we have a couple slides on that, a lot of data here. So not surprisingly, people who are making above, that $60,000, not having huge problems with rental costs. They're not cost burdened. Who is the low income, very low income, and extremely low income populations. So, and really it's pretty interesting how large that low income group is. It's almost equivalent to the people making above median income. So if you're thinking about where is the stress, where are the populations that are gonna have the hardest time with rental costs, there you go. And there's a lot of them. And this breaks it down a little bit more simply in terms of the numbers. So right now, by our estimates in Franklin County, 2,800 or so households are struggling with housing affordability, which is about 36% of the renter population. And in the city of Frankfort, that's 2,600 or 40%. So a little bit higher in percentage terms in the city of Frankfort.
Can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
You showed stats in Frankfort and Franklin County.
Yep.
Are you separating taking the city out when you talk about counties?
Yeah, good question, Brent. In this case, the county includes the city. Yeah, so that the 2,800 is inclusive of the 2,600. All right, now it's not just about renters. I think for the most part, all of us would, and all else being equal, owning a home is great compared to renting a home. We want to see people move in that direction. Not everybody can afford it. So we run a really kind of simple but powerful model to show what are the affordability levels like if somebody wants to buy a home given the income levels and the housing costs. So here's what we come up with. And it's interesting because this is actually vastly different than a lot of other communities that we've worked in and helps inform what we're doing with the forecast. So to purchase an average valued single family home would require at least $43,000 in household income. And that's excluding down payment. We're just kind of assuming that they have average credit, average interest rate, all that kind of stuff. That's not that big, really. I mean, so basically when you break it down, just 28% of households in the county, according to their current income levels, would not be able to afford an average priced single family home. So in other words, there's a lot of demand to continue to build the single family homes. Now you might say, well, that's the houses that exist. That's not the houses that are going to be built, which is a fair criticism. Houses are more costly to build now than the houses that are were built in the 70s or 80s. But going back to the other hand of the equation, let's say that new homes are built and they cost $450,000. It allows people to step up to that next level of housing, and then they vacate the home that they're in, which is probably closer to 280 or 350, and that is an affordable level for most of the households. So, and it's something called filtering that happens in the housing market. So essentially what it's saying is anywhere that you insert more supply within the housing market, it tends to produce more liquidity and allow people to move around and find the appropriate sized and affordability level of the house that they need. Lastly, also, it's not going to stay this way. Again, if we study what's happening in places like Shelby, Scott, you're probably looking at a 15 to 20% increase in home values over the next 5 to 7 years. So it's good in the sense that it provides an opportunity. It's bad in the sense that more and more people won't be able to afford. All right, and again, this just kind of puts it in perspective. All we're doing is looking at the ratio between household income and median home cost. And you can see here that in those terms, it's more affordable in Frankfort than it is in Franklin County, which is more affordable in the Bluegrass region, kind of similar to Kentucky, but much more affordable than the United States right now. Okay, now on to recommendations. I'm going to try to spend just 10 minutes on this, and then to keep to my 20 minutes, I'm not going to get to the survey highlights and the other stuff, but I can take Q&A. All right, so what can we do to help the area adopt and get towards these forecasts that we're talking about? First thing, gentle densification. So basically think of it this way. It's surprising to people, I think, when they first hear this, but if you look at the United States in general, 65 to 80% of the land area, it's illegal to build anything except for a single family home. Literally illegal. That's what we've done with our zoning code. If we want to see more affordability, we have to start changing that. It's that simple. So again, the builders aren't dumb. They know where the demand is. They know what people can afford. But if you don't allow them to do it, then they won't do it. So a few recommendations on that front. This gets pretty technical. This is a lot of the kind of stuff that Eric and company will have to hash through. But things like accessory dwelling units, for example. So that's, you're not splitting a parcel, but you're allowing another dwelling unit on the same parcel. Largely not allowed within the city at all. So we're picking out a few districts where we think that would make sense. Allowing duplexes in more areas. So if you just allow duplex in the RB, the RC, and the RS districts, for example, by our calculations, that's about 34% of the land area within the city of Frankfort. So how much more opportunity is there then to do infill on vacant lots, or to even take an existing home and split it into a duplex or something like that? By conditional use, allow 5 to 8 unit townhouses in the RC, RS, RD districts. So these are already kind of the higher density single family districts. So making it a bit easier for folks to do things in that realm. And then lastly, just adjusting down the minimum lot sizes. So this is another thing, like if you take a piece of land, right, and you say a home parcel can't be any smaller than X, if you shrink that down, you're allowed to fit more homes within that area, which is another thing that helps builders bring costs down a little bit. So some basic ideas on that front. And then as you probably see here, we also do our best to provide examples, right? So talk about Paducah, Georgetown. You're not the only ones that are doing this. A lot of other cities across the country, we just try to pick out the ones in Kentucky. All right, mixed use neighborhoods. I'd say something that we've seen through our survey work and some of our other reading and conversations, there's a lot of citizen concern over things like suburban sprawl, auto traffic and unexpected and undesirable places, kind of a lack of identity, not a lot of walkability, which has all kind of contributed to weak private sector investment. So this is one of those cases where what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Things that are good design also tend to attract more money. So if you have a downtown district where people like to look at stuff and like to be and like to live, your visitors are going to come there, they're going to spend more time there, and they're going to spend more money. The people who live there are going to drive less and they're going to spend more time there. So, but again, this takes a bit of planning to facilitate that. So just look at places where you can do some things to facilitate that. There's a few districts the city has that would allow, if you rezoned to that, you could do more mixed use type of work. Those are the PM and the UM districts. And then don't have time to get into it, but you could also consider using tax increment financing to spur ahead the private sector in those districts. And this is this conceptual master plan is from Spokane, Washington, a place that's near where I live. It was an old railway. I think it was, if I remember right, it's maybe 100 acres. They fit 300 plus housing units in there, plus a lot of really great commercial. So they've got a grocery store and some great restaurants. It was a great project, and it actually really helped connect residential areas to downtown. Live and work opportunities in downtown Frankfort, similar. I just saying, this is, maybe feels kind of anecdotal, but this is a very auto-centric city. That's how people get around. That's where a lot of the restaurants are. But you've got really awesome buildings and built infrastructure downtown, but it's not really unlocked. It feels like kind of an afterthought. So some of the ideas on this front is just, again, you really got to, if there's any way that you can take, say, any redevelopment happening on the Home Street corridor, turn that into something that's mixed use, it opens up a lot of opportunities for you. All right, short-term rentals, the moment we've all been waiting for. All right, my opinions on this are those of Points Consulting, not those of the city. I'm generally against command and control, is what I would is what economists would call it, types of policies that say you can only have X number of short-term rentals within this district or within, you know, X number of feet of each other. The reason I think it causes distortion, I think it creates favoritism. I don't like it. I'd rather see market-based kind of regulation. And also, I think it's important to keep in mind that if we try to lock the market in place, it's going to prevent it from finding the right equilibrium point. So although we all have seen some downsides to short-term rentals, I think we also need to be creative and think about where are we going to be 10, 20 years from now. One of the biggest problems that Frankfurt has is these low-budget kind of apartments, right? Well, we can't complain about that while at the same time complaining about people putting tens of thousands of dollars into fixing them, can we? No, we can't, because that's part of the solution. All right, so they're going to pour the money into it. Not all of them are going to keep them as short-term rentals perpetually. Some of them are going to convert them back to long-term rentals. It's going to attract other investors to be like, hey, maybe I could do some different type of housing product in this city. So I also think just the huge popularity and huge growth, we got it in the slides that on the website, is showing that there is proof of concept for some better hotels. That's effectively what this is, it's lodging. And then I think, again, in terms of those market what can you do with the market? Well, perhaps consider offering some carrot more than stick type of strategies. So instead of punishing so much you can say, well, let's give you a benefit if you follow the rules and you register in the right way. We'll put your name on this website. The visitor center will feature you, that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that people respond to as well. But there's also a place for the stick. If the problem is that they're making too much money at it and it's driving out more intended uses, then there's also always the option of increasing the fees, right? So make the problem part of the solution. If they're making money off of it, you can collect more money from them, and then you can even, you'll have to have your lawyers look into this, but take some of those funds and put it into an affordable housing fund that could go towards nonprofits that are helping people who are displaced by short-term rentals. So some ideas on that front. All right, I feel like I'm going way past 20 minutes, so sorry about that. I see some issues. We see some issues with the clarity of the zoning code and the development process. This is my perspective and the perspective of some of the builders that we've talked to. So I think sometimes what's happening here is that there's a kind of a lack of trust in the rules. The rules aren't super clear. So what ends up happening is when a builder comes to propose something, they just get this prevailing idea of like, we're just going to pump the brakes and make this slow and make this hard, and sometimes seemingly from their perspective to make up rules as they go. That's bad for business, and that's not going to allow you to get to the 2,800 units that you want. So a few things you could do on that front. This is a flow chart. We got this from a city in North Carolina. It's actually smaller. This is not a hard thing to do, but it's huge. It's huge. Like when I read the zoning code right now, I have a hard time as an expert figuring out what some of the stuff means. You know, for example, there's a bulk and density table, which is kind of a common thing that you see. And when you get to the definitions, it'll have a little footnote, and you have to go 24 pages down to find where that footnote actually defines what that thing is. If I'm an average builder, no. I mean, you might as well just say on the website, like, ask our permission for everything, which they're not going to do. They don't have time for that. They may not be interested at the time that you're open. You have to make it easier for them. Have to make it clear. Also, the Planning Commission doesn't meet that often. Easy for me to assign more work to people, but I would recommend a twice monthly meeting instead of a once a month meeting, because again, time is money. They're not going to do it if it's too slow and it's too hard. And then some other little things you can see there at the bottom. Some of these things I'm sure Eric and company are already working on within the zoning code update. Community land trusts, think of this as kind of that workforce housing, missing middle density kind of stuff that we were talking about. There's a way to do this that you can involve philanthropy, nonprofits, and basically the way that you do that is you separate ownership of the land from ownership of the home, and then you keep the land in a trust. So whatever that value is of the land, maybe 20, 30%, that gets locked in, and that price doesn't increase. You can also add deed restrictions, so that when they resell it, they can't resell it for any higher than that value. So this takes a bit of work to get set up, but it's become really popular in areas that are having huge housing crises. Low-income housing strategies. This is a tough one, right? It's tough for any community. Just use whatever grant funding you can from state or federal. You could also look at things like fee waivers for developers that are doing the type of development that's going to help with this. So LIHTC or low-income housing tax credits. You could, in a lot of cases, you can design some rules around this. Like, we want to see this much of these low-income units, and if you do, then we'll waive your tap fees, or we'll reduce them by half, or whatever the case may be. So, all right, I will stop with that. And like I said, I can answer questions. So. Okay, question, red shirt in the back first.
Simple question is the short-term rental buildings or zoning, whatever those conditional use permit, does that affect the value of the other properties in that area?
I'd say that there's not been a lot of really good empirical research on that yet. And the appraiser market is still even catching up with how to value short-term rentals. So I don't think that we've seen huge shifts nationally in terms of home values, either positive or negative, in proximity to short-term rentals. Yes?
Just the report, within the report, does it give a cross-section of folks who responded to the survey?
Yes.
Do we know kind of?
I do. I said over 1,000, it was 896, but here's a little bit on that front. And then we have demographics as well, which I'm not sure I don't have in here, but yes, it does. Okay, checkered shirt.
From your experience working elsewhere, can you talk about some
Uh-huh.
We have a lot of, number of people at the shelters here who have vouchers.
Mm-hmm.
They're perfectly capable of moving into a rental property, but there simply isn't any
Mm-hmm.
available.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about what?
Yeah.
strategies you've seen?
Yeah, it's so getting nonprofits involved. I don't seem to see a prevailing nonprofit that, you know, like a Habitat for Humanity type of thing that would do that kind of work. It's usually, you know, the government's not in that business. You know, they can reduce the challenges, but they're not going to build it. So you got to find, you know, first off, find the partner, and then start thinking about that policy package of, you know, density bonuses. Like if you do this and this, well, you know, we don't have to provide as much parking. Okay, well, think like the private sector: less parking, higher savings to them, more likely they're going to do it. So it's just things like that, marginal changes to the rules when it comes to affordable housing to incentivize it. Yes, sir.
Brent, in my experience in talking with a lot of the folks that live in our lower income corridors, Home Street and Bell Point and some of these kind of areas, it seems in the last several years, it seems that my perception anyway has been that Frankfort has been a destination for those lowest of low income folks that are being priced out of the surrounding communities, specifically Scott County and Shelby County. They seem to be landing here. Did you take into account any change in like the last decade for the percentage of low income housing and or maybe the future projections based on the influx of other communities and sort of how those other counties that are
Mm-hmm.
vastly growing faster than us are influencing what the demand is going to be? Can you explain that?
Yeah. So first part of that answer is I didn't see anything on the data on that, but that doesn't mean that that's not the case. It just didn't show up in the survey, and just empirically that's hard to measure. There's no real data set that does measure that. But what you're saying does stand to reason, given, you know, affordability increases and all that kind of stuff. So it's probably true, but I can't really tell you much more beyond that. Yes, sir.
So there's several categories of short-term rentals. One would be owner-occupied.
Right.
One would be a local resident buying another place in town and setting it up as their.
Mm-hmm.
The third would be outside investors. Does your data separate those at all? Is there any way to parse through those?
I don't know that from my data. The city code in the lower density housing districts requires owner occupancy in order to run a short-term rental. So that's a pretty easy test. You can count those, you know, assuming people follow the rules. And that's by the way, a pretty sensible and easy regulation that, I mean, yeah, is it easy to monitor? Maybe not so much, but it's one of the easier tools that you can use to prevent the impact in low density single family neighborhoods. In terms of local versus non-local, no, I don't know. I don't know of a way to measure that. Yes.
So at one point you said, you made a comment and you said builders are preferring to build in other places.
Yeah.
Sort of just, we didn't, kept going, but
Uh.
can you talk more specifically about why that is?
Yeah.
Because that seems like that's a core part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, so first off, I'd say on that the further you are from a metro, the more likely that is going to be the case. So there's already kind of an uphill battle for that. But you are in a proximity where they could travel to do that kind of work. So there's something else going on there. Anecdotally, what I've heard from a number of them is, you know, well, so-and-so used to build here and now they prefer to build in Georgetown. I think, you know, part of that is driven by the opportunities on the table. You know, if there's, for example, you know, half developed property that's already entitled that, you know, the builder goes bankrupt and somebody buys it, it's like that was opportunity driven. That wasn't necessarily a long-term strategy, right? And then you've got cases where I think that, and to be fair, I hear this in every community. So, but that doesn't mean that it's not true. It's true to a greater or lesser extent depending on the community. you do hear a lot of City of Frankfort is hard to work with. So I'd prefer to build somewhere else where, you know, maybe some of that is topographical and public works related too. You know, so you got a lot of limestone cliffs, and you need lift stations, all that kind of stuff. So, but I'd say you know, attracting the private sector to build in an area, it's really just like clarity and consistency. Like they're always going to complain about costs, but that's all you can do. Clear, concise, consistent. That's it. And if somebody comes, like I said, it's herd mentality. More of them will come. Yes, sir.
In your research, when you were looking at the affordable housing issue, how did you treat, and on what basis did you treat where and how the affordable housing should be located? For example, there are places in Frankfort and Franklin County that affordable housing
Mm-hmm.
would not be permitted, not necessarily
Mhm.
because the zoning is inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
It's that the people who own and live there
Right.
would not be friendly to
Right.
quote unquote affordable housing. You seem to have kind of jumped over that hurdle to
Okay.
give us the good news piece. Talk about
Yeah.
how you
Yeah.
arrived at your conclusions
Mm-hmm.
in that respect.
Okay. Yeah, and that certainly is going to be a problem. That and there, you know, when you're talking about a large enough concentration of a single-family neighborhood, that's frequently an issue. Just like, you know, some people call it NIMBYism. Don't want that. Like, yeah, maybe our town needs that, but not here. It's one of the hardest things in the planning world to deal with. That's start. It's really, really hard to adjust that expectation. But I think when you're looking at things like changing to mixed use zoning, it gives you more tools. I think when you're building on a parcel that is maybe already historically kind of blighted or is closer to industrial, it makes it more palatable, right? So I wish I could say that, you know, it could be anywhere, but there would be community resistance to that. So it's more likely what we see is it's going to be, you know, near commercial corridors. It's going to be on the fringe of industrial zoning districts. It's going to be properties that are being redeveloped. That's probably where you'll see it. But that's, you know, I take it as far as I can, and then, you know, the community's got to figure out how to implement that.
Ron, would you say that that's also the difference between having, you know, what we spent decades doing, having really large affordable housing,
Hmm.
you know, complexes, and then
Yeah.
people associate the things they don't like,
Yeah.
not multifamily or affordable housing with those, and having that mixture of that missing middle, where
Yeah.
you might have affordable housing mixed in with some duplexes in a single family neighborhood and things like that.
Sure.
It helps sort of self-police some of those perceived negative.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say that's part of it too, is, you know, building, encouraging and incentivizing and allowing building that has mixed income levels, so that you don't have, you know, here's the projects and here's the single family homes. Yes, sir.
So I'm gonna keep going with that subject here. So you've worked all over the United States, it sounds like. Do you know of states or even counties or federal government that incentivize developers to build affordable housing? Because I think that's where we're having a hard piece.
Yeah.
It's coming up with, you know, we have some, let's say that we have land, but how do we incentivize developers to build affordable housing? I think to me that's the question.
Yeah. Yes, I'd say so. In Colorado right now, for example, that's very common. And it's all across the board. You also see some states that are now implementing funds to help with it. You know, Colorado and Washington, I think, just passed something. So, you know, they'll take a portion of sales tax and they'll say, all right, this is going to be competitive, or it's going to be X% rural, X% urban, and, you know, give us your proposal, and we as a state will give you funds to develop that. All right, so is that going to happen in Kentucky anytime soon? Probably not. But that, you know, you ask for other places, and that's one of the things that happens. You'd have to check, you know, state law, ask your lawyer, but is it possible to do something like that at the local level? Maybe. I don't know what the local constitution would say on that front. But then the easiest one is just, you know, oftentimes the local charter has rules against, for very good reasons. You know, they want equal weights and balances and not favoritism. So to have rules against, you know, giving incentives for this, that, or the other thing, especially when it comes to housing. So if that's a problem, then you can also just look at, well, okay, you're also charging, the city or county is also charging those developers for a lot of things. You're also oftentimes charging them up front for those things, right? So there's ways that you can mess with that. Like if you can take, well, let's charge them less because they're doing an affordable project, and then we won't give them the bill until, you know, they get certificate of occupancy or something, so that they don't have to finance a big bill. In my research, the local fees for development make up, you know, 5 or 6% of the overall building bill. So that's not huge, but that's not nothing. So if there's, you know, that's what the only tool really that the local government would have to tinker with. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, what about the concerns about affordable housing relative to not having available the houses for those folks who do have vouchers for Section 8? And I know that probably incentivizing is one thing, and you might say, well, putting a requirement to the city or the county that any new construction complexes or even current ones, the owners must accept Section 8. I mean, a lot of cities do that. And it's not less money for the owners because they get paid the same amount for the property. But there's a lot of resistance to that. People don't want to be told they have to accept Section 8. There's such a drastic shortage here for people in line for it for years and can't get it.
Yeah.
And a lot of rentals will not accept, landlords will not accept Section 8.
Yeah.
So should the city look at, and I think they should, the potential of different ways to regulate that, or to say you have to accept Section 8?
Yeah, I think that's worth looking into, and it's true that it's not less money, but it is often more work because it's the federal government and they have forms and all that kind of stuff. So
We've got somebody from HHCK here. Do you guys speak to that?
Sure. I can do my best. We have seen across some states and some cities, Louisville, Jefferson County has implemented source of income protections. They have done an ordinance there in Jefferson County specifically for people experiencing homelessness based on veteran status. You can do any sort of protected class you wanted to in there, and that just says, like, if I'm coming to a landlord with even child support income as opposed to traditional employment, a landlord can't turn me down based on that effect alone. Some of the considerations, of course, are, as you said, dealing with the government, and then some of the inspections that have to take place. Like, there's a reason that the federal government doesn't want to put people in slummy apartments, if you will. But it is possible, and it's something that HHCK, we advocate for. We would like to see it passed on the statewide level, quite frankly.
Okay.
But we're not waiting for the jobs.
yeah. Okay. Thanks, Alicia. Yes, Brent.
When I've looked at census projections for Franklin County, it seems that a lot of the biggest growth in terms of the demographics and age is that it's mostly, or it's higher in the 70s and 80s and 90-year-olds. And so does your report address providing housing for seniors, types of housing, and let's say locations so that they can be part of the community?
Right. I'd say so first part of the question, yes, that's true. And that's a national thing, not just a local thing. Do we deal with it? Not in a high level of detail. Obviously the demographics point in that direction, and we look at 55 plus kind of population. I think again, there can be components of that with these mixed use kind of concepts and this incentivizing of certain types of development, and then there's the market can respond to these types of things. So that's about the depth that we get into that particular topic. Yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned low-income housing tax credits, I think in relation to parcel B and C, is that correct?
That was one of the possible places, but it could be other places too. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so is that not enough of an incentive, like if there's apparently there is an obvious demand, is that not enough of an incentive, the LAHTC, for developers to come to Frankfurt?
There,
Isn't that, I mean, can you also, isn't that sort of a mix, like, exactly what you're talking about, so a mix of within the building or the structure itself,
mhm.
you can, a developer could afford to build a nicer building or
Mhm.
renovate a building in a nicer way and still, cover their costs and
Hmm.
some margin of profit, no?
I'd say, did you want to say something to that, Penny, or do you have a different? Okay. The LIHTC is kind of a cottage industry, and for the builders that know how to do it, they do it well, and they are able to make money at it and provide nice units. But talking about the federal government once again, so it's not easy. It's complicated, and it's not something that people tend to dabble in. So I think it's more of a matchmaking type of thing, is finding the corporation with the funds to invest, and then finding the builder and all that kind of
Isn't
stuff.
that something the city or the county or both could do?
Yeah.
Go looking for something for
Yep.
developers that do that kind of work?
Yes. You can cut me off anytime, Eric. I don't know. Yeah, I'm leaning on you. So, okay. So I'm gonna go to folks that I haven't heard yet from first. So in the back first. Well, you answered a question. You didn't ask a question.
I have, in true white woman fashion, it's two-parter. One, is for the Franklin, for the Frankfurt and Franklin County folks. How many short-term rentals do we have right now?
I don't know the Franklin County numbers off the top of my head. I think the last time we did an analysis in the city, we're maybe close to triple digits.
Okay.
Um,
So we would still need, according to your projections, like demand for almost 3,000 units. Like, right?
Multifamily. Is that what you're talking about?
You,
Oh, total units? Yeah.
Total housing units, mostly single
Total housing
family.
units.
Right.
So, because I too, I tend to, as I work with people experiencing homelessness and low-income renters, I tend to like look very askance at short-term rentals.
Mhm.
But I have been doing some research and reading and such, and I think there are ways that we can make this work, without, just scrapping short-term rentals and demonizing them.
Uh-huh.
I like some of your recommendations.
Okay.
My other question was, on your subsidized housing writ large, were you able to dig into like 30%, 50%?
I didn't go to that level. No. That would be a helpful thing to work out, but was kind of outside of our scope. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Can I
Thanks.
just provide some information?
Yeah.
We're asking the county, there are between 16 to 20 short-term rentals in the county.
Oh, thank you.
That we are
That we
aware
know
of.
about.
Let me say that we are aware of.
Okay.
Right. Right. Okay. I believe you, sir, you have another question?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that developers and others had mentioned that it's too difficult
Mm-hmm.
to get permission to do construction and building and
Mhm.
other kinds of modifications in Frankfurt.
Mm-hmm.
And that the planning commission should endeavor to change that some. Do you have some specifics that you can share with us that might be immediately put into action that can be done
Mm-hmm.
to assist builders, developers, et cetera,
Yeah.
to alleviate some of that frustration?
Sure. Again, I'll go back to the what I said earlier, because it's a preface to anything on that topic, is that you don't necessarily have to, you don't really have to bend over backwards. You just have to, be willing, be consistent, you know, don't get 3/4 of the way through the process and then be like, oh, we missed something, sorry, we're gonna need new plans, and you're gonna have to pay for it, right? That stuff is really frustrating to builders. That's what makes them go somewhere else. So, you know, and I think a lot more communities should take that seriously. When that kind of stuff happens, they should be willing to pay for it out of their own pocket, because that's their fault. So anything on those fronts needs to be addressed first. And then I think, you know, I talked about this infographic. This, more than most places, let me get to the right spot. I'd say more than most places that I've worked, the process of building is complicated, because you have, you know, Board of Adjustment, Architectural Review Board, you got the Judicial Court. It's like there's a lot of steps. It's not clear what steps you're supposed to follow, and that actually may vary based on the zoning district. That's huge, just to make that simpler for people. Yes, sir.
You said that your analysis area sort of focused on the Woodford Scotch County side of our county. Can you give us some basis on Shelby County and Jefferson, or influences you mentioned? Can you talk just a little bit about how you evaluated the fast-growing communities' influence on ours, and maybe why those were excluded, like Shelby County, or what level of analysis did you give those areas in your report?
We mostly used it for that kind of benchmarking, which we have in the big slide deck, and most of those didn't make this short version. But it would be cases where you say, you know, here's growth over the past 10 years in the bluegrass region as compared to Franklin County, right? That's typically how we used it. And then when looking at the population forecast, it was, you know, it was one of those things that you have to be more just informed about, I guess, cultural patterns. Then you can't just look at, like, here's what's happened in the past, and therefore we're going to push that forward into the next 18 years. You have to kind of look at, well, what's happened recently and what's happening culturally that might, you know, infuse more growth into Franklin County. And that's where, you know, in particular places like Woodford, Scott, Shelby kind of came into that equation, because that's a thing. You know, if you're within X distance of a metro area, you've been growing a lot, and that ring is just kind of gradually increasing, and you guys find yourself in an interesting place where you're absorbed within 2 rings, so it actually gives you a double dose of that opportunity. Yes.
I think the ring that some of us are concerned about is that a lot of the new growth in Shelby County are immigrants, a lot of it is, and of course in Scott County is the industry in Toyota that is going to just continue to grow. With our growth in absorbing and creating more of a desired tourism in Frankfort, that's one thing that's driving the new Airbnbs in town. And it's also pulling from those cities people that would want to stay in short-term rentals to come here because they have access to those things, to the Bourbon Trail, not up here.
Yeah.
I think that we're such a small town that every Airbnb that's non-owner occupied that has been come online in South Frankfort has normally displaced someone who was either renting, especially in the apartment complex areas, that had grown up here and are not here now and go elsewhere. And I know we've talked a lot about affordable housing. It just seems in a town this small we can't completely separate out, you know, the impact that that's had, and then the projection of going into adjoining communities and allowing non-owner occupied short-term rentals in those is going to increase that. Now I know that you're saying, this is not a question, I guess it's not a question, it's a concern about the actual effect percentage-wise, and you've shown us some numbers about the effect of of affordable housing that short-term rentals might have. In a town that's small, when we know and see the people that are moving and going elsewhere and going to the homeless shelter when this happens. And then we have apartment complexes that are in zoned residential areas but are converting a large amount of those units to short-term rentals. So it's in effect many hotels within a residential area. Those things seem to be, you know, to me, beg the question of some sort of regulation
Okay. Yeah, I respect your perspective on that. I think there's also a kind of philosophical angle to it that we can't just make laws every time people do something we don't like with something they own.
But
That
a lot of cities have tackled that. Many
yeah,
cities are.
which I think is actually going to end up in the Supreme Court at some point, because I'm not even entirely sure that cities have the constitutional right to control it in terms of property rights. Separate topic, but yeah, I'm not saying it produces the best possible outcomes, but I'm saying that you need to look at the big picture, right? And the temptation with from the regulatory side is to always just like, let's stop it right here, and it's like, well, you're preventing it from taking care of itself over time. It's going to shift. It's going to change. It doesn't mean that it's perfect right now, and so that's why I'm suggesting, yeah, find other ways to house these people. But I don't think that stopping people from doing it is going to be the right thing, because I think we all see that there's also tremendous benefits to the short-term rentals, that it's bringing tax revenue and visitors and all this other stuff, and investment in real estate. Yes.
I have a question related to that. Maybe, I don't know if you can answer it, but, so along those lines, and you're saying that with short-term rentals, and you do generally get more revenue that way, that sooner or later, a lot of them will shift into, long-term just residential units. But you also mentioned that they're sort of like a hotel.
Yeah.
So do you know anything about new market tax credits? Could those
Yeah.
be used, if you can't use those just for residential, I don't think, but could you use it for Airbnb units?
Hmm.
Help that fund renovation or construction of nicer housing units?
Hmm.
And then slowly, as you're saying, over time, convert that into just purely residential?
Interesting. I'd have to think about it more. Usually those types of funds, opportunity zones, new market tax credits, the only type of housing that you can do with that are multifamily. But I guess that could be, yeah, theoretically
Well,
part
I
of
guess
it.
looking at it in reverse, so I think that I might not be completely accurate here, but the local hotel downtown,
Yeah.
I think sells or rents some of what used to be the suites in the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's not a hotel anymore. It's at least, well, part of it. It's a rental unit or a condo.
Mm-hmm.
Could you construct things sort of in the same way, where you're taking advantage of some tax incentives or other incentives that you couldn't, you wouldn't otherwise get for multifamily units, buildings? But instead of having a multifamily unit, you have a unit that you use basically as a hotel or an Airbnb
Hmm.
with, maybe mixed use.
Hmm.
Take advantage of, you're not going to get light tech, but you might get new markets.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there are other things out there.
Okay.
As you said, after a while, the market sort of equalizes or stabilizes,
Mm-hmm.
and some people get out.
Yeah.
Frees up residential space.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting idea. Sorry, I don't have a great answer on it though. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You're talking to me, I have,
Yes.
I know this is a housing study, but when you started out, you talked about 12% less occupational tax. How did y'all derive that number?
We just got that from I guess it was an assessor, not the assessor's office. We got it directly from the county, and just looked at the totals by fiscal year. Treasurer, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Come from budgets, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is and you mentioned this, if you don't have industrial growth to go along with housing, you can't afford the housing because you have to provide services for all of that also.
Right.
You gotta have fire, you gotta have
Right.
police, you gotta have roads, you gotta have sewer, you
Yep.
gotta have water, all that comes at a cost.
Mm-hmm.
And generally speaking, real estate taxes will not cover them.
Yep.
So, that's why I asked that. I realize this is a housing study. Not
Yeah.
economy study, I guess is right. I wanted another question about short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do for housing shortage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we don't know.
That's a business opportunity, isn't that what that is?
Yes, that's, yeah, it is. I mean, it could be multiple business opportunities. Like, this is, again, part of why I think we need to not overregulate that market, is that not everybody wants to be a short-term rental operator. It's not easy. It's a lot of work. You got to deal with tenant complaints, and they can't figure out, why it's leaking underneath the sink. It's 10 times harder than having a long-term renter. Not everybody's going to want to do it. It's very, very niche. So yeah, there's multiple opportunities along the, some people would be like, great, let's do just long-term rentals, or let's just do condos, or whatever the case may be. Everybody tends to specialize in the thing that they're good at. So I don't know if that answers your question, but. All right, gotcha. Okay. Well, I'm here if you guys have any other questions after the session. Yeah, sorry, last one. Yes?
So what's the next step with having this for our city and county officials?
That's probably a good segue for Eric.
Yeah, I mean, now this information is available for all of our public policymakers. I mean, and most specifically, immediately, it's available to inform the decisions we make with that comprehensive plan that I referenced that we're right in the middle of, which includes making decisions about future land use. But also, from some of the recommendations that Brian's made for us to think about these things and which parts of our development codes are stopping things from happening that we want to happen. Thankfully, we're going to follow the comp plan rewrite as a development code rewrite. So we're immediately going to have opportunities to implement some, all, however many of those ideas or other ideas we find from other communities to find out what things are not doing well that we can get out of, our own way. Because there are places, we haven't done a development code rewrite in a long time. And a lot of things have changed. And Brian's referenced a lot of that. So the most immediate things, if you're asking me, what do we do with it, is give it to our advisory committee, give it to our planning commission, give it to our consultants, and use that to incorporate recommendations and information in our comp plan. And then directly following that, it will be part of our collective knowledge and wisdom about what we want to do when we get to development code, that the comprehensive plan will help instruct us. And outside of that, you have whatever nonprofits might want to get involved, whatever other public policy alone to encourage some of those things that we've all talked about, whether it's affordable housing or, sensitive density, things of that nature.
So will some of those decisions and plans that are moving forward that you're talking about also consider and have time for public, or is that already passed, public comments after?
It has
we see
both
this?
passed and is still coming. So yeah, we're in the middle of that right now. What we're doing with the comp plan currently is we've been meeting about every 3 weeks with the advisory committee to go over the future land use map, which is kind of like this. What people always get confused about. It's kind of like a zoning map, but it's not. It's a guideline, and it's what we have to use per statute when a zone change request comes up to decide whether that's a thing we want to do. So we look at the entire comp plan, but a very big portion of that is this future land use map. It'll have some land use description on each parcel of the city and the county. Will be thought through. So once we get through the advisory committees, first go through that map, and also get through a first draft of the other various chapters and content of the comp plan, which we're hoping to get done in the next 30, I would like to say 30 days. Probably won't quite get there. Will be our next round of engagement for that process. So we're kind of starting as we're getting through the map and getting to the content to talk about what we want that to look like. We've done it in various sort of ways up until this point. So you'll probably see advertised in the next 3-4 weeks a meeting of the comp plan steering committee, which is made up by both city county representatives and a mixture of our planning commissioners. And their entire role during this entire thing is to get together and talk about those strategies for outreach, the process, and that kind of thing.
John.
I know in your preliminary slides that you sent several weeks ago, you had done a business recruitment analysis of incoming businesses and all that kind of thing. What is the relationship that you have seen with the projections of population and housing growth that you project versus commercial and industrial land that we need for the comp plan?
Okay, yeah. I think it's, for the most part, I think that's a bigger topic than what we tackled, but I can just speak generally about it, that most of the time you see housing growth following commercial and industrial growth, not the other way around. The only exception to that would be if you're literally a suburb that's kind of growing into its own and becoming, bigger than the area next to it. An example would be like Broken Arrow, which was one of our slides. Broken Arrow, Oklahoma is well on track to become bigger than the city of Tulsa, right? So started with housing, and now a bunch of, so you see this in some places. I don't think that's the situation that you guys are in. So just to say that that's a very much part of the comp plan thinking and process is like, well, what's the ratio we need to have here? Because you can't just have all residential or people aren't going to take the homes. It just doesn't work that way. You're a little too far away for that to be a legitimate strategy.
So if we have a housing need,
Yeah.
and usually you're saying that the housing usually follows
Mm-hmm.
industrial and commercial development.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that we have potentially done more here but haven't followed through with the housing development?
Yeah, I think that the private sector kind of growth is kind of it's the momentum is taking you in that direction. But you also do have so there's different kind of ways to different strategies and ways that a community can exist. And one of the things, another slide that we don't have in this this deck is the jobs to housing ratio. And that's really all over the map. Like there's not one right solution to that. So you don't have to have really, really high concentration of employment either, because you still can have a lot of out commuters, and then you just need to think about, are we producing enough revenue as a city to support all of that? It's a different question, So.
Just real quick, I wanted to thank you, Pedro, for the additional information and the expanded
Mhm.
report about veterans and housing and homelessness and income and all that sort of thing. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Should be solid.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a quick question, and this has not been mentioned, but housing also relates to Kentucky State University. And I don't know what their policy is now. I know that they housed a lot of people at the hotel for a while, and I know that they built this huge, dorm. And, do we have a sense of what their policy is at this point? Are they gonna expect everybody to live on campus? Are they gonna allow like the sophomores and juniors and seniors to live off campus? Because they do have an impact,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the low income housing
Mhm.
rental in this community. They can, if we don't, and if they need to be factored in.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much communication, did you factor that into your study, and how much communication do we have in this community with them about what direction they're going in and what their expectations are for their students? Because all that plays into it, it ripples out, all that plays into this,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
particularly at the very low end.
Yeah.
And I see people nod their heads, those
Yeah.
that work in shelters and we work with vouchers and
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. Yeah, we have run into that in the past, and I think it's really important that we clearly understand what direction they're going in and what their expectations are. And it brought it to my attention when I saw that huge dorm that they built, and I thought, oh, well, maybe now they're gonna expect everybody to live on campus. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, who knows?
Right.
Does anybody in this room know that, answer
Their
that question?
policy has always been for freshmen who are out-of-state freshmen to live on campus. The people that are in the hotels are because there isn't enough campus housing.
Right.
State dorms still won't combat all of that.
Okay, so there still will be.
They'll still be in the community.
Okay, well, this is a question, but all these things have an impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I, for our part, we tried several times to connect with Kentucky State and were unsuccessful. So we incorporated what we could, but it would have been, we could have gotten more out of it if we'd connected. So, yes.
Just a quick addition to that, a lot of the students at KSU are local students that are married or, have children that will
Yeah.
not be living in the dorm anyway. I think that's
Okay.
that's one of the, the crunches for those folks,
Right.
getting affordable rentals in town.
Makes sense.
A lot of them.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, I'm going to cut myself off because I bet there's some people in the room who probably want to go home and eat. So, but I am here if you need me. So thanks very much for your time.